The Sonic Advance series are games that I hear people talk about in pretty high regard online. I hear a lot of people say that they really like these games, and I've been meaning to play them for a while, but just never got around to it. I had a Game Boy Advance as a kid, and I also really liked Sonic as a kid, so you would think that I would have played these games, but my GBA was a hand-me-down from my sister, so most of my game library was stuff like Hello Kitty Happy Party Pals and Lizzie McGuire 3. So today I want to finally play these games as well as give my thoughts on them to see if these games hold up as well as people say they do. So starting with the first game, it is immediately clear that these games take a lot of inspiration from the classic games. This is by no means a bad thing, but it is just very clear from the movement of the characters and the design of the levels. While I don't think this game ever reaches the highs of Sonic 2 or 3, I do think that it is still a solid classic Sonic experience that I had a decent time playing through. The levels are designed very similarly to the classic games where we have higher and lower routes you can take, with the lower routes usually being the slower option. I don't think that the levels are necessarily great, and I have problems with quite a few of them, but overall I had a fun time and can say that they did a good enough job. But another big part of this game is the other playable characters you have at your disposal. We have Sonic, who can do everything he can usually do. He has a spin dash and the insta-shield attack from 3 and Knuckles. I'm a pretty simple guy when it comes to Sonic games, so Sonic is usually the character I prefer playing as, and that's no different here. Next up, we have Tails, who has the ability to fly. This actually makes the game a lot easier, since if you fall down to one of the lower routes, you can usually just fly back up with no real issues. To be honest, I didn't really go for the Chaos Emeralds because the special stages are absolutely miserable in this game, but if you were going to do it, I would do it with Tails since it is much easier to find them with his ability to fly. Knuckles is also here with his usual gliding and climbing abilities. Also, the B button now acts as an attack, which is exclusive to each character, which is a fine addition, though I didn't really use them all that often. In all reality, all of the characters play almost identical to how they did in 3 and Knuckles, which is nice since it sort of makes this game feel like a direct continuation from that game. But we do have one other character with the addition of Amy to the roster. Now, the thing with Amy in this game is that she doesn't really play like the other characters. You see, all of the other characters have a spin dash and curl into a ball whenever they jump, which allows them to defeat enemies. But you see, Amy has neither of these and can only attack using her hammer. On paper, this sounds pretty interesting since it offers a pretty unique way to play through the game, but to me it's just kind of frustrating. The levels are clearly designed around having normal Sonic attacks and movement options, so using Amy can just feel sort of awkward. I appreciate that they tried to make a character that felt different from the others, but I also just think that they made her a little too different to fit into the game well. Ultimately, I had a pretty good time with this game, as it sort of just felt like a continuation of the classic games. I think that if you enjoy any of the original Genesis Sonic games, then you might as well give this one a try, because even though it may not be as good as some of those games, I still think it offers a fun time. While I did enjoy that last game and would recommend it, it did feel a little bit on the tamer side. It felt like it was just sort of replicating the classics without ever reaching their heights or adding more of its own spin on it. But with the release of Sonic Advance 2, the developers decided to give this game a bit of its own style by emphasizing speed far more than the first game did. I think that this was probably the best decision they could have possibly made for this game because holy crap, the movement feels amazing. For the most part, the characters pretty much control like they did in the first game, but whenever you launch off of a ramp or spring, you are able to form an extra move in the air to keep your momentum going, which just feels so good to pull off. Also, by gaining enough speed, you sort of go into a boost state, which allows you to go even faster, and it feels really fun to use. The levels have plenty of places where you can just go crazy speeds while also still offering a challenge, so it's not just a game where you hold forward the whole time. As far as playable characters go, we have our main trio with Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, who all control like they did in the original, but just with some of the new movement options added into this game. But we do have one newcomer with Cream the Rabbit, who for the most part plays pretty similar to how Tails plays, except she has her Chow that can attack for her. Amy also returns in this game, but more as a 100% completion bonus than anything. I think her overall moveset feels a lot better than it did in the first game, as she plays like an actual Sonic character this time around. But back to the actual levels themselves, I do actually have some problems. You see, while for the most part these levels are super fun to play through, I think they can be a little too reliant on bottomless pits. You can be running around having a good time and make one singular slip up which will just lead you to falling down a hole and having to restart the level. While I'm fine with having instant kill elements sprinkled around here and there, I do think that it needs to be pretty obvious when you need or don't need to worry about falling into a death trap. I think most Sonic games do this pretty well because you can usually see enough of what is around you to tell whether or not you will die by falling down. In this game, sometimes you'll just get launched in the air with no indication of what is below you just to get met with a great big nothing. I think it's fine to have sections like this that encourage you to know the level better, but instead of just killing you, maybe it should just lead to a slower route to keep the levels from feeling as frustrating. Like I said, this game feels amazing to play, but your first playthrough of some of these levels can be pretty rough. Ultimately, for me, it's not a huge problem because I enjoy the game enough to be willing to learn the levels and figure out the layout, but it definitely could be a turnoff for a lot of people and definitely made me enjoy my initial playthrough a little less. But we are not quite done with the negatives just yet, as I think there is still one big problem with this game: the boss fights. You see, I get the idea they were going for, make the bosses a little more fast-paced to keep up with the rest of the game. But when doing this, they also managed to make the bosses extremely frustrating with constant attacks and very small opening to get hits in. I genuinely just didn't enjoy any of these bosses and found most of them to be extremely frustrating. But honestly, other than those two problems, I quite like this game and will definitely be going back to it every once in a while. So the final game in the Sonic Advance series is Sonic Advance 3, and oh boy do I have some stuff to say about this one. So Sonic Advance 3 is an interesting game to talk about. It has a lot of ideas that on paper sound great, but in execution just don't work well, alongside the core gameplay just not being as good as the other two games. To just go ahead and get it out of the way, yeah, the levels in this game just aren't as fun to me as the other two. They are just filled to the brim with all kinds of different new platforming ideas like these timed switches or these Newton cradle looking things, but I just never really enjoyed any of these elements and found that they just sort of mess with the flow of the level more than anything else. For the most part, the constant bottomless pits are gone, but for every missing pit there is one slowly moving box in a tight hallway. I made a similar point to this in my Sonic 1 vs. CD video, and people took this as I think there shouldn't be platforming in Sonic games, which isn't at all what I said. To me, there is a very big difference between engaging platforming and just waiting for things to move. A lot of these new elements don't make the platforming harder or more interesting, they just cause the levels to feel boring and uninteresting. But despite these problems I have, I don't hate the levels in this game, and there are some that I do enjoy, but those just aren't as frequent as I would like. I will say though that for the most part the bosses are much more tolerable than in Sonic Advance 2, so that is appreciated. But on to some of the new things that this game has, we first have the hub worlds. Instead of just playing the game going from level to level like the other two, you have a hub world to traverse to get to each of the levels and bosses. To be honest, this just sort of feels pointless and just adds more tedium to get to the levels. The hub worlds are just more confusing to navigate than anything, which just makes replaying the levels not nearly as fun as the other two, where you just have a little menu you have to navigate through. But the other new addition this game adds is the new partner system, which allows you to mix different characters together to get different abilities. It can be kind of annoying because now certain abilities that you just had in the other games are locked behind certain character combinations, and some character combinations just make the character you are playing worse. It's a cool idea, but I just don't think it was executed the greatest. Ultimately, I don't necessarily dislike this game or hate it or anything, I just think it's mediocre. It doesn't have the solid classic level design like the first did, or just the pure speed of the second game, which just makes it feel inferior to both in my opinion. Like I said though, I don't hate it, but just think that it doesn't really offer the same quality that the other two games do. So after finally playing through this trilogy, I can definitely see why it was regarded so well because I really enjoyed my time with these games. If I had to rank them in order of how I enjoyed them, it would probably be 2, 1, and then 3. Sonic Advance 2 offers a pretty unique and fun experience that I will probably keep playing well after this video despite my problems with it, which is why I would say it's my favorite. Ultimately though, I would say that all of these games are pretty high quality and I would definitely recommend them if you haven't checked them out yet, but I definitely have to say that Lizzie McGuire 3 probably tops all three of these games.